I've officially identified my NFL draft crush, and he actually might be pretty familiar to you. I'll tell you about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. We talked about Will Howard as a potential option for the Browns in the draft. I'll tell you about the Ohio State Buckeye that I really want this team to draft. Also, Jalen Milroe, anyone? And why I'm officially team trade back from number 2 overall. I do want to thank you for being in every day with the Locked On Browns podcast and making us your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play just $5. Rolls around, and we all have our, I like to call them draft crushes, guys that you fall in love with during this process or that you loved in college. You just loved their game, and you would love to see them on your favorite team. In this instance, the team that I also just happened to cover here in Cleveland with the Browns. And this one, I guess, should have been obvious to me a little bit earlier because it's the team that I follow pretty regularly. Yes, I'm talking about Ohio State. And I know that last episode we talked about Will Howard. I guess it was a couple episodes back now this week. We talked about Will Howard as a potential option for the Browns and whether or not it was a viable player they could pick. I think his stock did rise throughout this college football playoff. And I do think like the presence of some of these quarterbacks and the intriguing aspects of their game, being that they're probably later round options, is something that entices me to maybe wait on a quarterback because I'm not so sure that the top 2 guys, if the one that I think is the best fit is going to be there, and B, if it's worth, taking the risk if they don't pan out. But as far as Ohio State players are concerned, it struck me the other night that Quinshon Judkins is a lot like another former Cleveland Browns running back that people obviously used to root for, used to adore, used to love. And for that reason, he is my NFL draft crush at the moment. Like I watched that first touchdown that Quinshon Judkins scored in the national championship game on Monday, where he stiff-armed a guy, ran through 2 guys, ran a guy over, and dove into the end zone. And all of a sudden, I had this epiphany of just realizing Quinshon Judkins has a lot of Kareem Hunt in his game. And we all know from the days of Kareem playing in Cleveland and being a Cleveland guy, how much of a fan favorite he became in a pretty short amount of time, and then spent the 5 years here in Cleveland, his hometown team, and played alongside Nick Chubb, and they sort of spelled each other. Those were some good times for this Browns team, and with an offense that is obviously this offseason, as we talked about, trying to get back to doing the Kevin Stefanski system, the wide zone play action, operation. Having a good running game and a running back that you can rely on is going to be immensely important for this team moving forward this year, but obviously into the future. And I think Quinshon Judkins would be a perfect player to fit that, what you're looking for, and add a running back to this group that you can kind of depend on, moving forward. Because again, and that's kind of the big question here, right? Is, Kevin Stefanski, if they're going back to this system, they need good running backs, and they need running backs that are like reliable. And right now, the room, I like Jerome Ford, but I don't know that he's like a frontline starter at running back. Nick Chubb, I've said it. I think he's coming back, but we don't know 100% what we're going to get from Nick Chubb. Back-to-back seasons now with season-ending injuries, which is unfortunate. but I want him back. I want him part of this group. I want him to be able to come in and provide, that spark and contribute. But I do think at this point you need to have somebody who can be sort of your frontline guy, your starting guy, and relieve Nick Chubb in a way, and those two can kind of complement each other in the same way that Quinshon Judkins and Trey each other at Ohio State. So I am absolutely in love with Quinshon Judkins' game, his ability to break tackles, get that extra, those extra yards in a physical way. And the reason I say, like I said, he reminds me of Kareem Hunt is just because of how physical that he runs the football. I mean, we used to watch Kareem Hunt, and maybe the best way to put it is Kareem Hunt does, and you can obviously watch this with the Chiefs because he's playing with the Chiefs now, and he's still in the playoffs. He runs like he's angry every single time he touches the football, and he puts his shoulder into people. He is tough to bring down. He is that physical bruising style of a running back. And I see that from Quinshon Judkins, who has really nice patience to his game. He doesn't just he lets the plays kind of develop, and then he just kind of picks you apart. And at the same time, he's able to deliver that blow to give himself those extra yards and run through a defender. It's a pretty remarkable aspect to his game. And as soon as I saw that touchdown and what he did on it to score against Notre Dame, it literally just I was overcome with visions and reminders of Kareem Hunt and the way that he used to play. And I'm like, this guy's perfect. I mean, Cleveland Browns fans, and you know this, Browns fans love those bring your own lunch pail, put your hard hat on, show up to work, and let your play do the talking style players. And Quinshon Judkins was very much that at Ohio State this year. Like, he was out there just letting his play do the talking. He and it spoke very, very loudly because of what he was able to do. Even though he was in a split carry, sort of sharing workload backfield, he was great. And you saw that especially on the stage. I came blown away by him, and understanding like what the Browns are trying to accomplish this offseason in terms of rebranding the offense back to what it used to be. I think he'd be great, and I think he would be received very well from the fans, not just because he went to Ohio State, like I said, but also because, the way Kareem Hunt was received by this fan base and accepted, obviously being from Cleveland helped, but he gives you that again, style of play that fans here really embrace, that blue collar mentality. And man, that's it. That's it for me. Like, there's a lot of Ohio State players that you could draft and they could make an instant impact on this team. Quinshon's now at the top of the list for me. He's the definite one Ohio State player that I would love to see just make the trip up I-71 and be a Cleveland Browns. How do you feel about Quinshon Judkins? Would you like to see him in a Browns uniform? And, do you think he would be a good fit in this Cleveland Browns offense? We'll, curious your thoughts on it. Also, speaking of the NFL draft, and we talked about Will Howard this week, another later round quarterback that has an intriguing connection to the Cleveland Browns. We will talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can always be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace is the leading virtual therapy provider. It makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. They match you with a licensed your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your own home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by most insurance companies and plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's even easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter the promo code SPACE80. You'll get matched with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80. So as we talk more and more about draft prospects, as we talk more and more about players that the Browns could consider in later rounds, and that was something I also, by the way, didn't mention about Quinshon Judkins. This running back probably going to be like a second, maybe even a third-round pick. I'd lean maybe more second, but there's going to be a run on these guys probably day 2. And so that makes it more viable that you could even get him in a not necessarily make him like a day 1 priority, which is part of the reason why he's also intriguing to me as a guy, to potentially be on the Browns' radar going into that second day of the draft. Another player who falls into that category is Jalen Milroe, quarterback coming out of Alabama, and there's some issues, not issues, but there's some shortcomings in Jalen Milroe's game to this point in his college career. And as he enters the NFL, there are things that a coach is going to have to be mindful of and probably attempt to, coach out of him and coach him up on. And that mostly revolves around his ability to throw the football. I think there were some things this year that didn't really didn't see the field as well as I think you would have expected for a player at that stage of his college tenure. And so there's something there that there's some things there he needs to work on. But I'm intrigued by Milroe at the very least for a couple of reasons. A, he has the athleticism that you look for in these quarterbacks these days. Like I think it's not a coincidence that as you look around the NFL, you see a lot of teams, and it's funny how this has changed over time because, I remember the days of Lamar Jackson coming out and you got people saying he should be a wide receiver, and now that's like the blueprint. You want an athletic quarterback that can escape the pocket, make plays with their feet. They're not just a statue back there, even though that was like the old former style of quarterbacking that everyone used to obviously, look for. And I can't still be productive in the NFL. Like I think somebody like Quinn Ewers is like that. Quinn Ewers could still end up being a pretty good quarterback in the NFL potentially, maybe a great quarterback in the NFL if he gets the right coaching and he can figure out some of his deficiencies in his game. But it's no surprise that the NFL is very much pivoted to these athletic quarterbacks that can make plays with their feet, that can do some things in terms of like attacking teams in a multitude of ways, not just throwing the football. And if you look around the quarterbacks that remain in the playoffs, pretty much all these guys fit that billing. Josh Allen, great runner, very physical style of play. Patrick Mahomes, same sort of thing. He can run when he needs to. Jaden Daniels, obviously taking the league by storm as kind of that dual threat quarterback and likely the rookie of the year or the offensive rookie of the year. And he's been phenomenal. And then Jalen Hurts, his game, I would say, revolves around his ability to run the football. And you got the tush push and all that. So like this is the style that the NFL is kind of pivoting to when it comes to these quarterbacks. And I think Jalen Milroe has a chance to bring that part of his game and make that sort of a flawless part of the transition to the NFL. His ability to create with his athleticism, his running ability, that's something that fascinates me about him and a reason why I think he would honestly be a solid fit for the Cleveland Browns. And again, he's not going to be somebody you got to reach for it with the number 2 pick. You can probably wait and get him in the second or third round and feel pretty good about it and be able to, again, start this process of maybe developing a quarterback for the future. And I like the prospects of that. And also by nature of where the Browns are drafting, because they have pick 33, essentially the first pick of the second round, because they have, again, a top pick entering that third round, that gives them the ability for that trade, a potential trade back up. If there's a guy they really like that they're worried about getting taken off the board, like a Jalen Milroe, for example, they're in an easier position to trade up just because of where they're sort of placed at the beginning of each round. You're not so far down the order to make those, that jump if you need to back into a round. So that goes for the first round too, where again, pick 33, you're just outside the first round. But the biggest difference is that those second round picks don't have the 5th-year option. So I don't know, maybe Milroe's stock rises enough that he's a fringe first round pick. Well, you can get back in that first round pretty easily if you're the Browns and draft him. So again, there's a lot of opportunities here, a lot of options here. And I'm intrigued by Milroe athleticism standpoint. His passing game needs some work. There's some things that he needs to improve on there. But the other part of this too, and sort of the other big overarching point I wanted to get into in relation to that, is the fact that he had better numbers under his then offensive coordinator, who just so happens to be the Browns offensive coordinator now, Tommy Rees, who spent the 2023 season at Alabama. Slight uptick in his completion percentage from last year to this year, or from, I guess, this year to last year. If you're technically going backwards here. He was at 65% in completion under Rees. He was like 64 point something this year. Just about, he only had 10, or I don't know, maybe it was like 40 more passing yards, I think, this year in his his junior season, if you will, at Alabama. He also had more touchdowns this year. In terms of, he went from like 6 to 11 in terms, or 12 or something like that, in terms of the picks that he had thrown this season. And so I like the idea of Tommy Rees having some insight into this player. And as the offensive coordinator, sort of giving you a sense of, or giving the Browns rather a sense of, can he fit our system? Can he fit what we want to do from a standpoint of, we think he can develop into an even better player, especially if he maybe sits behind a veteran at first that can sort of, show him the ropes and teach him some things. So I like the idea of that. Now, that doesn't mean like you're committed to Jalen Milroe as your future franchise quarterback forever. Like if you get into a spot where you can pick one next year in the top 10 or something, and you like that class better, that it still behooves you to try to do that. And then Milroe maybe becomes an option for you to trade. I don't like there's the opportunities are endless. You can't necessarily not draft one this year just because you're like, well, we'll definitely get one next. You just don't know what's going to happen between now and next year's draft to some of these prospects, to, there could be injuries, who knows? So I think it's worth drafting one this year, even if you don't take one or two. And Milroe sort of fits that billing. His ties to Tommy Rees are enticing. His athleticism is super enticing to me as well. And I think he could ultimately end up being a fit for this team if they pass on taking one at number 2 overall and they decide to wait a little bit longer to do it. So yeah, I think that connection has been made. It's not like this is some groundbreaking discovery by me. Oh, he played with Tommy Rees in 2023. Obviously, that's pretty evident. But that was before, or that was like the moment Tommy Rees was named offensive coordinator. We were all sort of coming to that realization. The closer and closer we get, and we actually will hear from Tommy Rees later today on Thursday. The closer and closer we get to the draft, and as I hear more, I like the idea of pairing them back together and having Rees work with a player that he's obviously had a history with, and in an offense that I think could work for him, because, I don't want to say Kevin Stefanski's offense is simple, but you're not going to be asking him to do so much the way that you maybe were with Deshaun, or I guess you weren't asking Deshaun to do a lot because he likes the off structure stuff. But for Milroe, I think like making the throws easy, booting out, and you got layers to where you're going to throw the football, that type of stuff in Kevin Stefanski's offense, it helps and makes the transition to the NFL a little bit easier for a rookie when you can present them a menu and say, hey, here's what you got to do. Here's, you simplify what they're seeing, and that makes the reading part of it and the throwing part of it a little bit easier as well. So call me intrigued at least, Rees, and we'll see how the Browns feel about Jalen Milroe in the months ahead. Final topic coming your way on the Locked On Browns podcast, and along the lines of the quarterback conversation and I guess the quarterback controversy, should they take one at number 2 overall? I'm officially team trade back. I explain why. Up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can have $5 and get $300 in bonus bets guaranteed. And that's $300 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live betting. So same game parlays and so much more. It's easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. I'm a big anytime touchdown parlay builder in the postseason. I missed a different parlay this past weekend that involved like Indians and the Commanders, but I've already got my eyes on Bills Chiefs this weekend as a chance to try to win some of my money back from that parlay that I lost, and I likely will be building one this weekend. So we'll see how that goes. Just visit FanDuel.com today to join and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So I've talked about what the Browns should do with the number 2 overall pick before. Everyone has their opinions on it. There's plenty that believe quarterback is the only option, the option they have to take, the route they have to go. And I understand that. It's been a massive need for this team for years. Still can't figure it out. And it's the biggest need on their radar this offseason. But as I talked about previously, like the option of trading back feels like something that the Browns would just, lean into and do. I'm now officially in that camp. I am staking my flag in the stance of trading back. I think makes the most sense for this team. And there's a number of reasons for this. I think everybody's looking at the Commanders saying, be them, do what they did. Okay. But that requires there being a Jaden Daniels in this draft class. And I don't know that player's there. Certainly between the top 2 guys, those are the best guys. But their best is not necessarily on the level of what last year's best looked like from a quarterback prospect standpoint. I don't know if you have a Jaden Daniels in this draft class. And so you can't just, again, pick one because you need it at the top of the draft. And there's somebody there that makes that's consensus top quarterback in the class, because it's a different sort of it's a different curve, if you will, for this year's class, last year's class of quarterbacks. And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. And as I talked about with Jalen Milroe, and as I talked about with Will Howard earlier in the week, I'm intrigued by some of these guys you can get in the later rounds. And by later rounds, I mean like day 2, maybe, not even necessarily day 3, although Will Howard still could be a fringe day 3 guy. We'll see how his draft process goes, like his combine and all that. But I understand people want one, but you can't make you can't just throw caution to the wind and take one because it's a need and you feel the pressure of taking one. You got to be smart about this. And if you can get value on somebody like Milroe or somebody like Will Howard in the 3rd round, maybe 2nd round for Milroe, maybe even early 4th round, and that doesn't mean they're going to pan out. But if there's value there and you feel like there's some basic skills and the size and everything that you're looking for to maybe develop somebody, I think you take a swing if you don't love the class and the guys at the top of it. And I obviously think this is complicated too by the whole Shedeur Sanders thing and whether or not he's going to be accepting of playing in a place like Cleveland. That's on the back of my mind as well, because I think he's the better fit of the 2 top guys in Cleveland. But the problem is, again, are they going to make a stink about playing in a place like Northeast Ohio? If Dion wants him to end up with the Raiders or something, I think he ends up with the Raiders. And speaking of the Raiders, it's funny I kind of went there. I think that's the team that you can entice to trade up and give you an absolute haul of picks to come up and get Shedeur Sanders if he's there. Or Cam Ward for that matter, if they really like him. Look what Tom Brady's doing. He wants to make a big splash at the team that he owns. And he wants to, it reminds me a lot of Matt Ishbia in the NBA, if any of you are NBA fans, who came into Phoenix, bought the team, and the first thing he did was let's go make all the big trades and acquire all the big name players, get Kevin Durant in here, get Bradley Beal in here. Not really working out for him right now, but that's kind of what it feels like with the Raiders right now. Tom Brady's kind of come in, injected some life into that organization. He's trying to do things his way and make the big splash and get people excited. And so it feels like he can sort of be had in a trade because he's going to want that quarterback for this team to sort of blaze this new future. And if he really likes a guy, you could sort of, I don't want to say dupe him, but you can lure him into, hey, come trade up, get your guy. We want all this in return, though. And I think you would pull the trigger. I really do. So whether that's Shedeur Sanders or somebody else, I think there's sort of an opportunity to sort of take advantage of Tom Brady because he's, trying to do a lot in a short amount of time to get this team and this franchise going in a different direction. But look what he's doing right now. And all his friends in power and random sort of hires, and he's kind of seizing the opportunity there and taking control of things. I just think it's interesting. So that's a team I think that you could trade back with. I think ultimately, though, trading back makes the most sense for this Browns team. I think the roster is in a better place than some people give it credit for. They have really good players at corner. They have really good players at defensive end. Some of the key positions already taken care of. You got to fix the offensive line a little bit. You could use a number 2 wide receiver. You could use a running back, as I alluded to earlier. There might be some other positions on defense. You needed some new defensive line guys to pair with Myles Garrett. But addressing those things is a little bit easier when you have the opportunity to trade back, accumulate more picks, and then make picks with players that are, still great premium players, but that aren't just I'm drafting a quarterback. You kind of have an opportunity here to fill a number of spots on your roster and add depth to some key positions. And I think that does matter for the Browns, especially when you consider they haven't had first-round picks the last 3 years. So in a way, they're kind of playing catch-up. I don't want to say it's completely like that, but it's important that they fill some of these holes that they've not been able to in recent years, while also still building a quality team around whatever quarterback they're going to sort of roll with next season. And I just think next year's class is going to be better for the quarterbacks. And again, the people who are worried about well, you're here now, you have to do it. I get it, but if you make the right trade and you get maybe a first next year to pair with your own first, all of a sudden, it becomes pretty easy to trade up into the top 10 next year if you really like a quarterback in next year's class. And so those are the conversations that this team has to have. But I think right now, in terms of who they like, who they don't like, which year they maybe feel like is the best. But I do feel like right now, and I don't know that I'm going to budge on this, trading back feels like it makes the most sense for a team that is trying to avoid going into a complete rebuild and can supplement some places on the roster. That feels like the right move. Draft a quarterback in a different round and see if you can develop him. And if there's a future for that potential player, a Jalen Milroe, Will Howard, like I said, in the NFL, maybe a Quinn Ewers, and know that you put yourself in position next year to maybe trade up and really get the guy if any of those guys aren't legitimate starting quarterbacks in the NFL. I just think that's the best route to take. And there's some holes that this roster needs that you can address otherwise with having multiple picks rather than just using the one you do have on a quarterback. And you again get your roster back to on solid footing, as they're not having first round picks the last couple of years. If you pull something off like that, that's going to do it with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me as always to talk about your favorite football team. There'll be plenty of more to talk about the weeks and months ahead, including what Tommy Rees has to say about becoming the new Browns offensive coordinator. We'll hear from him today. I hope you continue to make us your first listen every day. For your second listen, go check out one of the new Locked On NFL shows, or if you want to keep it local, you can check out Locked On Cavs, Locked On Guardians. Thanks for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. Peace.